Well, listen, great to be here with you again on day 2. I think yesterday we talked a bit about brand, and we're going to devote this session to the power of brand. I think there's always an interesting challenge we have when we promise something. How is it actually felt by your customers, clients, or partners day by day? So does the promise actually match the delivery and execution? Are we authentic in terms of delivering that brand 24/7, day in, day out, across all interactions? So that's what we're going to talk about a bit today in terms of the power of brand, when it's done correctly, and how we communicate and engage with customers perhaps differently than we've done before, and how we infuse that across the entire organization. So Wolfe. So Stephanie, thanks for joining me at short notice. Really appreciate you being with us today and dealing with some of the traffic problems you've had this morning. Stephanie, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure. Okay. So yes, my name is Stephanie Wolfe. I'm the Executive Vice President and Head of Marketing at Global X. And I think our conversation today, I've been in the industry, financial service industry, for about 20 years now. And I've seen a lot of change. And I was really interested actually in the previous speaker who was up here, because it just reminded me of how much that data and the experience over the last 20 years has changed in financial services. It's mind-blowing. But I think what we're going to do is kind of take it back to brass tacks, the basics today in our conversation, and some of the things that should be done by every organization. As much as we have this advancement of digital technology and the ways that we can connect with our customer, we have to remember the base on the brand and what we're trying to achieve.
Indeed. So let's kick this off in terms of the first question. So how do you build a coherent content and comms approach that fits with your strategy, brand strategy, and purpose, that really fosters that high level of engagement with your target customers and hopefully drives growth and connection to your brand?
It's a loaded question. So first of all, is there anybody in comms out there? Or is everybody in marketing? Comms, we got a couple comms people. Okay, so they're going to like what I say here. Okay, so what I would say is there's two things. One is to be really clear about what you're saying and communicate who you are. The second is that consistency is critical. Okay, so we know that taking an ad hoc approach to communications never works. It has to be baked into everything that you do. So Global X, some of you might not be familiar with Global X, but many of you might be familiar with Horizons ETFs. So this past year, I actually underwent a rebrand, and the comms strategy was a very important part. Global X is a $35 billion company now. So to move that from Horizons ETFs of 13 years and to rebrand within a 6-month period, communications was extremely important. So I would say, it goes beyond consistency, like I said, that has to happen throughout. But it's more than just the name change. And so making sure that everything was buttoned down, including a brand blueprint with guidelines that we could communicate across every touch point within the organization that we still use to this day. So those are the two things I would just leave you with, is that investor communications, they can't be an afterthought. It has to be right at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think, how do you start to bring the whole organization behind that? Because clearly it's fine for a marketing function to define the brand promise, work on that, build the brand guidelines, the brand architecture. But how do you ensure the whole organization is really behind that, really gets it, understands it, and brings that personality to life in everything they say and everything they do to customers, clients, and partners in everyday dealings?
And, I think leaders can set the tone, but it's truly the employees that are really going to bring that brand to life. So, like I said, I'm fortunate enough that I can speak to this recent rebranding experience as an example of what we did. Because at the end of the day, we recognized that having the comms up front and having our employees aware of what was happening at the very beginning was super important, because they are the brand ambassadors at the end of the day. So they're the ones, engaging with the customers, as we just saw in the previous presentation. It was fantastic. And they're the ones that live and breathe it. So what we actually did, and it's very relevant in what we're still doing right now at Global X today, what I'll say is that when we did the rebrand, we announced it to the employees when we were a month internally. That was a bit of a risk, obviously, because you want to keep things under wraps, but we wanted them to feel engaged in the entire process. Because your employees are part of that brand, you want them to feel empowered as they are moving through this experience with you. So from a marketer's perspective, sharing with employees at the time how this rebrand was going to happen and being very clear on the communications, they were empowered and felt that they were part of this process too. We then had a soft launch in this early spring, and then we went out with the launch in the summer, May 1st actually. So it's just important to bring them along at every touch point for sure.
And then perhaps a bit beyond that in terms of how do you make that come to life day in, day out operationally. So as well as the frontline employees, when we're thinking about change or product, how do you ensure that your product managers, product directors, operational leaders are also thinking about the brand when they're designing, delivering new things to market? So I think that's always a challenge. I can imagine that's probably a challenge for most people in the audience, right? We have a brand, a promise. How would you ensure everybody's connected with that and delivering something which is consistent with that promise and making sure they're making decisions with those things in mind?
Yeah, and that's where, coming back again, I hate to use it, but it's the pillars of what you're trying to communicate, right, for that brand. So defining the essence of your brand. For me and for our brand, it's actually innovation. And so once you have clarity on what that one pinpoint piece is going to be for your employees, they can carry it through to every touch point and make it real for people. So it really helps us deliver a consistent experience across all the channels. But I would say that you have to be able to connect the dots for them. That's perhaps sometimes when things can fall apart. You want people to feel empowered, so how do you do that? I work in a smaller organization, so I can't speak to some of the bigger organizations like the banks and how difficult it can be. But I would just say that it's important to make sure that you're infusing it across every single channel and who you're talking to. You want people to make it their own as well, right? They're going to own it at the end of the day, and you have to know your audience. Those are the things that I would definitely know.
And I think yesterday we talked around customer journeys and walking the shoes of customers, right? So your key customer touch points, your key customer journey stages, the ownership around those journeys or touch points. How do you ensure those people are also infusing the brand promise across those key touch points and journeys at every stage? So we're consistent, deliberate, 24/7, time and time again to bring that to life and not going off track in terms of eroding the brand, actually.
The North Star, so to speak.
Yes.
In many ways. And I would say that that's where strategy comes into part. So again, coming back to the leaders and ensuring that all the leaders within the organization can pass on that North Star and that experience to the employees and then on to the end investor.
No, I think I'll just add a bit to that. I think, we'll talk about it a bit later with Mark. I think that how you make sure that's infused across all your touch points, so people understand how they apply that to their individual role, individual ownership in a customer journey, and think about that North Star or customer commitment we'll talk about later on in every decision and every key moment and every change program, and making sure they have customer in mind, the promise in mind, and design that experience consistent with that is a really important thing. Otherwise, we'll have inconsistency, right, between what's promised and actually what is executed and felt by your customers, clients, or partners in your day-to-day dealings with the brand, right?
No, it's important, and it kind of yes.
And just in terms of how you then track and measure that, because we talked about metrics yesterday in terms of how do we demonstrate the power of the brand and actually is delivering value creation. It's a session about bringing premium value. So how do we measure and track whether the brand is actually delivering and deliver that brand promise is actually making a difference in the marketplace?
Well, and actually, to my comments earlier when we were just started talking, I think we've seen the advent of how much we can actually measure within marketing now. 30, 40 years ago, it was more like, let's test, what does our audience really want? We're not really quite sure. But today, I think we've got so many tools in our back pocket that we can really leverage to understand where we should be converting and where we can, hone in a little closer on our target audience. But that measurement has to be specific. I think it can become overwhelming if you're not really sure what your end objective is, what it is that you're actually trying to measure. The amount of data and resources that marketers have at their fingertips can make it so that it's it's overwhelming sometimes. So understanding exactly what you want to measure and how you can measure that success, you can drill very deep. And again, I've just been so impressed, especially even in the last 5 years, I would say, the advent of how we're able to go deep and understand the behaviors, the wants of our clients, and really communicate in that way. I think that's super important. When I say coming back to brass tacks, I think that's what we can't forget. At the end of the day, we're all humans. As much as we have all this digital advancement behind us, at the end of the day, it's about connecting emotionally with that client, because that's what they want. And it's interesting with financial services too, when we think about it, we're often telling people what they need, and it's not really what they want. We know what they need, and that can sometimes, and we also have compliance and regulation and everything else that can sometimes hinder those experiences and what we're looking to measure. But I think it's really, really important that we, at the end of the day, we just think about how can we connect emotionally with that person and that end client and who our target audience is, and use the measurement tools that are out there to achieve that. So quick example, like for us recently, and I'm speaking from the asset management space, we recognize that there is a shift happening within the landscape of investment management. We know that investors are more empowered than ever before to invest independently. Advisors are still very much relevant. The power of advice is there, but we do know that Canadians, through the advancement of digital technology, have been empowered like never before. So coming back to Global X and that basis of innovation, we're looking to really disrupt how Canadians are actually able to get investment information. And that's at the core tenet of what we're experiencing, or what we want our clients to experience with us. So we're currently in the process of developing something that I would say is rather disruptive within the industry, and we're very excited to share that soon. But it's truly about understanding. We've had to go very deep on understanding the Canadian retail investor through specific measurements and tactics. So that's why I say this is more around the foundation of brand and going back, if you did study marketing, remembering all those tenets, those core tenets and rules, that despite everything that's happened in the world and how much we can measure for success, we really have to continue to hone in on the specifics and not get overwhelmed by what's available. Focus on the client.
And perhaps let's build on that in terms of new personas, new needs, new requirements, how they want to be communicated with. What's the opportunity, you think, in the financial services space in general for brands to communicate and engage with their customers in different ways to drive traction towards their brand and trust in their brand?
Well, social media is one. I mean, we've clearly seen the shifting demographics in terms of traditional advertising, TV. I don't want to say that traditional TV is dead, but I think it's dying. People are turning to YouTube. They're looking at their social media accounts. I mean, we all do it. We all have those apps on our phone right now. I mean, just the other day, I was thinking of something and the ad showed up on my Instagram account, and that is always creepy, but very cool. So, understanding behaviors of the end client is super important. So we are seeing that consumption change. And so being relevant in that space and coming back to those core tenets of connecting with the client and understanding their emotional need in financial services. It's not, it's the need, we know you want it. And making that, I think, can really close the gap.
I think I picked up on something from the last conversation, which we haven't discussed, but I think it was this interesting one, which I really liked, actually. We always have to find ways to continue to date our customers.
Yes.
As a financial services provider. Because the reality is people will put a lot of effort up front to build new relationships, acquire new customers, acquire new clients. They sort of forget their existing book. So how do we ensure we still maintain our relevancy and engagement throughout the customer lifetime and journey and those key moments of truth in a customer's life where they deal with a FS provider?
Yes, and we all know how expensive it can be to acquire that first client, and so you want to keep them, and through that entire journey process. And so, again, coming back to, because I sit as head of marketing, is coming back to all those traditional aspects of doing the research and understanding where the user experience, where they're actually finding that hiccup. You have to know that client from end to end, and I would say, 10 years ago, that was more difficult to do. It's so easy now. It's really simple to understand what your client's experiencing.
And is that all driven by the marketing function, or you putting power in the hands of touch point owners and journey owners to also be part of your ambassador community for your brand?
Yeah,
To also-
yeah. The tech stack, the ops teams, all of them, they need to be involved. But how do you do it? I'm selfish. I want marketing to be infused in every single one of those channels. So, having, I love to have hybrid, experts that can sort of jump in to each of those and oversee tech stack. I mean, we can debate on where they would sit, but I think at the end of the day, the marketers own that relationship and are the revenue growth drivers. So.
And how do you build those brand advocates across the business? So, that community who really can help you, I suppose, making sure that brand is really lived day by day. So I think you talked a little about building those brand advocates internally when you were starting with the new branding, so that you got them involved early in the process to understand what we were trying to achieve, the message you were trying to communicate. How do you ensure they always feel connected and can actually start to perhaps help you infuse that brand even further?
Well, and that's another department that marketing aligns with, is human resources and people and culture. And really making sure that even when you've got, so thinking of even your employees almost as a customer when they come in, how do they experience the brand and what tools, resources do they need to feel empowered to represent that brand as well? And so that's where it starts, at the minute that employee enters the doors.
Yeah.
But then I would say it's also important to continue to have regular touch points, I would say, internally with your employees across the organization on the brand and
Yes.
what they're seeking. So.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So how many of you have got proper induction programs, would you say, to people understand what the brand really means to them individually in their roles, how they live that brand promise day by day? I once went to a centre in Qantas's place in Australia, where I went through their immersion program for all onboarding. And I was intrigued by the fact that actually they told about the brand promise, the brand story, the history of the brand, and how they would actually represent that day in, day out. So I just wonder how many people have really got that sense of onboarding people in the right way so they actually become those brand ambassadors.
Yeah, actually, by raise of hand, has anybody gone through like a proper brand experience when they've onboarded with a new company? I'm just curious if anyone's doing it. I don't see many hands. There's a couple. Yeah, and truly, like when I think a brand is done well, the story is fun to tell. And people want to share it. And so I think it's really important. This is where I think sometimes in the advent of how fast we move in our industry, some of these core tenets can be missed. And it's unfortunate because you do want that brand infused across every touch point, and employees are the brand ambassadors.
Yeah. So we open things up for some questions. And there was some conversation I had yesterday with some people talk about how they're helping organizations build effective comms and engagement with customers across the customer journey in different ways to do that. So perhaps a few questions in the audience we can take, Stephanie, to probe this a bit further. Any questions and observations and thoughts? No? Oh, there's a couple here. Let me go on the microphone. Ah.
Yes.
Often very overlooked in terms of whether it's a transition or just the day-to-day brand story, having people live it and breathe it. Beyond email, tips and tricks on how to get that story consistently to people without the email exhaustion piece of it.
Yeah, and then the other piece, as you said that, I immediately thought of, the ensuring consistency across all of the PowerPoint presentations. And, it depends on the size of the company as well. Outside of an email, I would say again, it comes back to the size of the company. We are a flatter organization, less than 100 people. So it's very easy for us to have quarterly rallies, and marketing usually does have a seat at that table, and we're able to share some of those exciting stories about the brand, and everybody loves swag as well, so that helps. But getting them to read emails can be tough, especially, and if you're doing tests within and getting people to engage that way can be difficult. Internal branding websites sometimes help as well. A lot of effort to maintain and keep those up, but very important as well. But even a quick video now, I'm finding video applications are really a great way to engage with your employees. And so having the video in less than a minute, people have attention spans like this now, but hitting on those key messages that resonate about what your brand stands for really helps empower people to go, I remember that, I can use that line. Speaking with sales too in financial services, one of the things we like to do is give, one or two lines that they can use in their pitches, right? That just resonates to the brand. So that's important as well. And thinking about the different verticals within your business and what they would need to feel empowered with the brand helps. Messaging is always, again, the comms aspect is so important. But I love that with the advent of digital and video, how much people are able to embrace it a little more. I think everyone has the different styles. That's a good question.
Any other questions in the audience? One at the back.
Thank you. First of all, I'm glad to hear that the brand was brought into this CX conference because the two work together.
Correct.
Yes.
My question is, in your brand, you're making a promise to your customers. Mm-hmm. In your CX, do you make sure that your promise is being delivered?
Across all touch points, that has been something we have been working on, I would say, and this is where I've had the beauty of the rebrand just recently. And from end to end, my industry is a little different because we cannot actually, we can engage with our client, but we're not gathering from them at the end. So that's where our experience becomes a little more difficult, but where we want to communicate with our partners within the industry to ensure that they understand our message as well. So we have jump off points. But that's where I think I've had the beauty over the past years to really go deep on how we can engage with them across all parts of the business. And obviously the digital experience is the most important, I would say, right now.
Let me build on that question. I think that I used to be global head of brand and customer experience for for a healthcare business, actually a global healthcare business. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a saying anybody's in the London Tube system?
Yes.
Mind the gap, right? Mind the gap. And I think that's a really important saying because people talk about the experience gap. So is the promise you're making, is it authentically, consistently delivered day in, day out, at every touch point, in every conversation, in every product design, in every change decision, and every process redesign? And that consistency and that red thread is there across all your touch points and key journeys and every conversation you have with customers, clients, and partners. That's the challenge for me, and that's the power potential of the brand when it's really brought to life. Very few brands do that, in my opinion. And I think the experience gap is alive and well in a lot of financial services players, in my own opinion. I think the promise which is being made and communicated with lots of money being spent on is very rarely delivered consistently and done well. And that erodes rather than enhances the value creation, the shareholder value of the business, and the long-term value creation. I think that is the power. That's the power of the brand when it's done correctly. But it takes, engagement up front. You mentioned that already. B, constant reinforcement. You mentioned your brand ambassadors. C, people understanding and getting it in terms of their role and what that means in their role. How do they go about personally whatever role they play to bring that brand promise to life? So I think and it has to be reinforced.
I would add consistent communications.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just expand on consistent communication to what do you mean by that in sort of like, how do we...
Across all channels, yeah. Well, because as you go through those highlights of the things that we've talked about, engagement, et cetera, making sure that your brand message as a marketer, that everyone who is, especially on the comms team, is communicating that tone, voice, values, brand. It all has to come through all the time. And that can be a challenge because sometimes your end customer is not always the same.
Yes.
So you have to tweak it slightly to adjust to each end audience.
And what do you do when you see that's not being done by a product owner or a touch point owner or a tech owner, and they're not delivering against that promise? What role can marketing play to ensure that's addressed in some way?
Well, usually we'll see it in the data first, right? Because you'll start to notice there's a gap. as you talk about, in that experience, it comes through in the data. Something's broken, something doesn't make sense. So it starts with that. Let's regroup. Let's have a conversation and figure out how we can improve this process. And that's why I said marketing is a touch point for everything within the organization. And we do have our hands in a lot of different areas, and ensuring that consistency. The power of data is so important, because the more that you can show something isn't working through data, the better you can make your point. So that always comes in handy, but the data usually points to where there's an issue.
Yeah, I think the other point I would say is a conversation, we're going to talk about it later on, myself and Mark. I think it's also about capability building, right? People understanding how they can contribute, enhance that promise, and make that come to life in a day-to-day work. So sometimes we have to look at the scenarios people are in, what role they contribute in the organization, how they can contribute to bringing that brand to life, and look at the scenarios which really help, and then reinforce that through daily conversations, daily engagement, daily coaching, etc. So for me, it's a constant, always-on conversation, really.
Absolutely, never ends.
Yeah. Any other final questions? There's a couple more at the back, I can see. We've got a couple of minutes left. Hi there.
Hello, thanks for joining. Quick question around when we think about communications and marketing for influencing customer behavior. So perhaps you've released a new product or something, and you're trying to change the user customer experience and their behavior. What are your tactics or strategies you would suggest?
Can't give away some secret sauce here. I've been working exactly on that very recently in the last few months.
Keep it generic.
Keep it generic. Okay. So again, I think your comms, right? So yeah. So they go hand in hand. Marcom is super important. I've just lost so data is number one, starting there. Understanding who your end segment is and what you're trying to find out their behaviors, and then connecting with them through those channels. So I've done a lot of testing and learning over the last 6 months, in particular in the finfluencer space, actually, through social media channels. Finfluencer, social media influencers that are financial influencers.
Okay.
And lots of great data to be had there, is what I would say. So continue to test and learn in some of those different experimental areas, disrupting how Canadians and the end client, I think, receives and gets that information is super important these days.
Thank you. There was another question, I think, from the gentleman here. For the last minute.
Good morning.
Yeah?
We've heard the message that CX has to be embraced by culture, by leadership, by C-suite. Often what we find is the client-facing, the customer-facing roles get it a lot sooner. It being in the financial services space, we have a lot of operational functions that don't necessarily get that exposure. Challenge that, in my experience, in current experience, is to get those leaders to see the value in getting out of the transactional day-to-day tasks and see the bigger picture of the impact of their work is much greater than they might, say, see it. Do you have any tips on how I might get them over to the dark side or the good side?
The good side.
Yeah.
No, I know, and that is a very good point, because I've got the same challenges as I'm sure others do. We see it. They are a bit more disconnected. Like, they're disconnected from the rest of the company to what's happening. And so I think it is important. I'm going to come back to the use of video and having the opportunity to somehow demonstrate to them, even through client testimonials or something that they might have touched indirectly, so that they can see how the brand is perceived with the end audience in the segment. So win stories, videos, like being able to share some of that is really important. But I fully acknowledge that is one of probably the most difficult areas to engage.
Yeah, let me build on that. I think that for me, you're either serving a customer directly or supporting somebody who is serving a customer directly. It's your role to play. So firstly, you have to make sure people understand what their role is anyway to deliver the outcome you want for customers and deliver loyalty and trust in your brand. First thing. Second thing, I agree with you. How do you bring those stories to life and then reinforce and create heroes in your organization who have done exceptional things for customers and recognize them in some way? So I think that storytelling, create those stories, make that visual, make that known, make that always on, make sure people understand their role in the process, how they support and enabling delivery and better customer outcomes, customer growth, and earn growth. I think all have their role to play. So I don't think there's one magic tool here. I think there's lots of them you have to use depending on your starting point and organization. I think we've come to the end. I'd really like to thank Stephanie. What's your one final piece of advice, Stephanie, people to leave the audience for to say, I'm trying to get my brand, the power of the brand, bring it to life, making sure I can communicate with customers. What would be your message or thoughts?
Well, again, coming back to the core, know who your client is, know who your audience is. And just a quick anecdote, for me, I was 15 years in corporate before I actually took off my corporate hat and stepped into an entrepreneurial role for 5 years. I'm now back in corporate. That experience allowed me to see and be very closely connected with my end client. And what I'll say is sometimes in the corporate world, we can get stuck on all of the metrics and the data and everything else, and we can disconnect from what that end client needs. But that entrepreneurial experience that I had, I would never give up because it made me remember exactly who I'm talking to every single day and the importance of that. So I would just leave it with that, keep it real. There's a human behind that screen, and let's connect with them on an emotional level.
Thanks, Stephanie. Put a hands up.
Thank you.